Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Podio Commentary. My name is Matt Jarbo, and I'm going to be your host while we discuss arguably one of the greatest films ever made. And I mean, like, if not in the top 10, like the top 20, and I'm going to go as far as to say absolutely in my top 10. The Princess Bride is a movie that I think fully defines my childhood. This is the one that I watched more than Star Wars, the one that I watched more than E.T., more than Indiana Jones. I would rent The Princess Bride and watch it time and time and time again, going as far as even my best friend and I would be playing like wall ball in my room. For some reason, I had the space in a mobile home back in Beaverton, Oregon in like the late 80s. And, we were like going like, all right, I'm going to be Wesley. No, I'm going to be Wesley. You going to be Humperdinck. Humperdinck, you little, like we were start fighting over who's going to be the hero and who's going to be the bad guy. This movie is important to me. And it's one of the films I just sat down with my kids and showed them for the first time. And my daughter is 6 and my youngest daughter is 5. And my youngest didn't quite get it. She didn't really pay attention, but the 6-year-old I think is in that right frame, that right age group, because all the questions that Fred Savage was having, right, in the movie, she was asking a lot of those questions that were going to be answered by the grandpa. And that just means to me that she was like zeroed in on what this movie was. And that just made it so much more fun to watch. And so much more fun to enjoy with her, and as well as just enjoying it as an adult. I think the last time I remember watching this movie was sometime in like the mid 2000s. It's been that long. In fact, I know for explicit fact that on September 5th, 2006, I watched it. And if you're asking yourself, how do I remember that date specifically? That's the day after I quit smoking. It was September 4th is the day that I quit smoking. September 5th was the day that I watched the movie on cable. And my mom came in and she was watching it with me and she smoked like 3 cigarettes during the movie. And that drove me up the wall. That's why I remember it. But I don't associate The Princess Bride with that kind of memory. What I associate it with is very good moments of my childhood. And moments I'm hopefully going to be having with my children the more we watch it. I recently bought the movie on 4K from Criterion. It's a great little set. The movie we watched, the version we watched was not that. I found it on Disney Plus. So I feel like I cheated on my 4K a little bit, and I'm definitely going to rewatch it on 4K because there's just so much of this movie to love and so much of this story that is really interesting. So like, why don't we just kind of like dive into it here? So for those of you who don't know, The Princess Bride is actually based on an actual book written by William Goldman. Goldman wrote the screenplay for the movie. But this particular version, like the story of The Princess Bride, is very much reflected in the opening and closing of the movie. And that is William Goldman, when he was a child, remembers his father reading him this story or telling him this story. And so he wanted to write it as a book when he got older, right? But the thing was, though, is that he remembers only like the good parts of the story. And if you recall, there's parts in the movie when Peter Falk kind of skips over some of the scenes because it's like, they did this. Okay, like moving ahead, let's get to the next part. It seemed like they were trying to like find a way to like cut for time. But, when I was watching it again, I noticed that. I'm like, oh yeah, like they kind of skip around and do a little bit here, a little bit there, kind of, speed up the timeline, if you will. But that's because that's the way the story is told. So the original story as it's presented is that it's The Princess Bride written by S. Morgenstern. And that William Goldman wrote an abridged version called the Good Parts version. And that's like the story itself is meant to just be the good parts of this tale. But the thing is that the good parts of this tale resonate so well with so many people. Even though the book itself failed to kind of find a footing when it was first published back in the 1970s, There was another author by the name of Spider Robinson, that's the guy's real name, who convinced William Goldman to put the excerpt from the book, including the fight scene, the duel scene, between Wesley, or the Dread Pirate Roberts, and Inigo Montoya, and to put that in an anthology called The Best of All Possible Worlds. And Robinson believed that this is what helped get the story out to more people and reach the right audience. And you know what? It's possible. It's entirely possible. But the movie came out in 1987. And so that was where a lot of us know what this is, right? This is what we know of. So what we have to understand about all of this is that the journey to bring The Princess Bride from page to screen was long, arduous, and it was just completely fraught with challenges. Like I said, the novel was published in 1973, and it did capture a lot of imagination as it got more popular, especially Rob Reiner, who got the book as a gift from his father, and that would be Carl Reiner. And there's a little bit about Carl Reiner that we'll talk about towards the end of this that is very bittersweet, but also kind of awesome. And so Reiner wanted to make this movie because he was struck with the unique blend of adventure, romance, and humor. And then he wanted to adapt it into a film after he made This Is Spinal Tap in 1984. But it turns out that Reiner wasn't actually the first person to attempt to adapt the novel. Shortly after the book's publication, 20th Century Fox actually paid Goldman $500,000 for the film rights and hired him to write a screenplay. At that point, Richard Lester was attached to direct, and the project almost moved forward. However, before production could begin, the heads of the production at Fox were fired. This seems like a commonplace problem at Fox. Executives are coming and going, or they're just stupid. But then when those guys were fired, it led to the project being shelved. And so Goldman was disheartened by this turn of events. And he ended up buying back the film rights with his own money because he was determined to see the story adapted properly. And this is one of the reasons why the movie is so damn good. Really. You have other prominent directors that had expressed interest over the years, including Francois Truffaut, Robert Redford, and Norman Jewison. That's a name. That's a name. And this is kind of crazy because at one point, Christopher Reeve was actually wanting to play the role of Wesley. But that actually fell through for various reasons, such as financial issues and difficulties finding the right creative approach. So this is not when Robert Reiner was attached to the movie. This is well before that. However, for Rob Reiner, though, his breakthrough ultimately came when he found support from Norman Lear, the legendary television producer whom Reiner knew from his time on All in the Family. Lear had previously financed Reiner's directorial debut, This Is Spinal Tap, and agreed to back The Princess Bride. The project then secured distribution through 20th Century Fox, which is interesting because then it ended up going back to the studio that had originally optioned the rights in the first place. But now it was under direct creative control from creatives who understood the assignment and who respected the property. Reiner himself was very deeply involved in the adaptation process, working closely with Goldman to ensure that the screenplay remained faithful to the novel's spirit. And oh boy, did it. Goldman, who had been very protective of his work, found in Reiner a kindred spirit who understood the tone and humor of the book. Actually, in a 2011 interview, Reiner acknowledged the influence of then 20th Century Fox head Barry Diller, who advised him to make the film in the vein of The Wizard of Oz, a movie that, while not an immediate blockbuster, became a beloved classic over time. And that is something that we have to remember about a lot of these movies, right? It's like right now there's this whole controversy going on with Francis Ford Coppola and his new film Megapolis. And there was some faked review quotes that were put out on a trailer yesterday. And those were done, I think, to showcase that his movies have always been kind of attacked when they first came out and then went on to become seen as masterpieces down the road. Movies will take time to find the right audience sometimes. They don't always happen overnight, but the way our instant gratification society when it comes to entertainment has been a thing now for such a long time that if a movie doesn't hit right away, it's considered terrible. And that's just not true. Some movies you don't get to right away. Some movies you find down the road. Some movies you just love immediately. Others, it takes time. You know, it's kind of like, what movie was it? Encanto. Okay. Encanto. Hated Encanto the first time I saw it. I didn't like the music. I didn't resonate with the story. I thought it was just pretentious. It was boring. It was dumb. I was just in the wrong mood. My kids watched it again and again and again and again. And then after like a couple times of viewing it, I was like, oh, I get it now. And I love the music. I love the story. I can sing the whole soundtrack. You know, sometimes it takes a little bit of time to come around on stories. That's the beautiful thing about movies. You have the opportunity to be able to do that, you know, to go back multiple times. So then, of course, there became the process of trying to cast the other people in the movie. Cary Elwes impressed Rob Reiner with his performance in later Lady Jane and considered him perfect for the role of Wesley. However, Elwes was in West Germany filming Maschenka during the casting process, which led Rob Reiner to fly to West Berlin to meet him in person. And this, of course, just solidified that he was perfect for the role. When they cast Princess Buttercup, that was a bit more challenging. There were other well-known actresses at the time that had auditioned for the role, but never seemed to fit. Some of these were like Uma Thurman, Meg Ryan, Courtney Cox. Imagine any of them as Princess Buttercup. It just doesn't fit. There's like a regalness that Robin Wright had. You know, there's a very like stoic, you know, naivety mixed with regalness. Like she nailed the part. Because again, none of the other people could really kind of match what Reiner wanted. But Robin Wright actually came later in the process, just a week before filming began, actually. And it was her agent that encouraged her to audition. And despite her initial shyness, she impressed Rob Reiner and the casting director. And when she met Goldman, he immediately recognized her as the embodiment of the character he had written, solidifying her place in the film, obviously. Okay, when you walk in and the writer's like, "You're my Buttercup. You're going to be Buttercup." Mandy Patinkin and Wallace Shawn were also cast early in the roles for Inigo Montoya and Vincini, especially Wallace Shawn because he was small in stature, because he also provided a very kind of like stark contrast to Fezzik. Also, apparently, Danny DeVito was apparently considered for the role. That would have been awesome to see, but Wallace Shawn is just amazing. He's great. He's annoying. He's got so many great lines. He's got such a wonderful presence in the movie. You know, it sucks when he dies because like you miss out on more of him, but you know, he served his role great. But where we get to André the Giant as Fezzik, this was kind of interesting. Because back in the 1970s, when Goldman was writing the novel, he actually wrote the character with André the Giant in mind. And they wanted him for the role. Except the problem with that was he had his wrestling commitments, which made him unavailable. Then they considered Arnold Schwarzenegger, who was at the time, this is back in the 70s, an unknown actor. But by the time The Princess Bride was ready for production in the 1980s, he was big. Conan the Barbarian, Conan the Destroyer, Red Sonja, Red Heat, you know, Raw Deal, Commando, like all that stuff, you know. It's Schwarzenegger in the 80s, man. You can't. Running Man, although no, this came out the same year as Running Man, to be fair. But yeah, he was just too expensive. They couldn't afford a salary. It had like a $16 million budget. It really wasn't like that. I mean, it was expensive for maybe the 1980s, but like still, it was lower budgeted than a lot of things. But then, of course, Reiner's team was like, well, let's see if we can get him. Let's see if we can actually make this work. And they reached out to the WWF in order, this is back when it was the WWF, to inquire about André's availability. And then he couldn't really do it because his schedule conflicted with a major wrestling event in Tokyo, which is basically going to make this guy $5 million. So then the casting team auditioned other tall actors like Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, Lou Ferrigno, and others, and none of them really seemed to fit the role. I mean, like in a pinch, I could see Lou Ferrigno, but when you're known as playing the Hulk and you're known as being like a brooding character, Fezzik would be a complete juxtaposition to that, like a gentle giant. And people might have had trouble with that. But André the Giant was always, he was a lovable guy. He's always a big old teddy bear. Everyone loved André the Giant. But the Tokyo wrestling match was ultimately canceled, allowing André the Giant to join the cast, even though he had back surgery leading into the movie, and they couldn't actually he couldn't really lift anything. So like the scenes where he's fighting Wesley, then the scenes where he was capturing, catching Buttercup as she jumped at the end of the movie, that was all done with movie magic as a way to make it look like he had strength when he ultimately didn't, but he still brought such a loving warmth and kindness and gentleness to the role that Fezzik is, I know Inigo Montoya clearly, right? My name is Inigo Montoya. You killed my father. Prepare to die. Like that is iconic. Beyond iconic. You know what I mean? Like everyone knows that damn line. And you keep using that word. I do not think it means what you think it means. Like that. It's so many memes came out of this movie that it's like, again, people kind of tend to look more at Mandy Patinkin, but André the Giant, dude, flat out, man. He was great. He was awesome. So with the cast in play and everything ready to go, they shot the movie overseas in late 1986 over the span of a couple months. They shot across England and Ireland, which gave a perfect backdrop for the film's fairy tale setting. So even though they shot all the exteriors and everything in England, you figure they would have probably just shot the bedroom scene at a studio soundstage in Los Angeles, because that's where Fred Savage would have lived at the time for him being on the Wonder Years. Or maybe, no, I don't think the Wonder Years was a thing yet, but I think Little Monsters was right around the corner. But no, they flew him and Peter Falk out to England, where they shot that at the Shepperton Studios in Surrey, England. And those scenes were actually the last to be filmed, which is kind of interesting. I'm sure they only took like a day, maybe two tops. But one of the things I'm reading here that I find to be very interesting is that Rob Reiner really wanted to have the cast get to know each other. And I always love hearing these stories about the cast spending a lot of time kind of isolated together in order to build up the camaraderie. So what Rob Reiner did is he rented a house near the filming locations in England, where he would frequently host meals and gatherings for the cast. According to this, this helped really create that sense of camaraderie and family among the actors, which translated into their on-screen chemistry, which I think is very true, right? You can tell that Mandy Patinkin and André the Giant have a deep love for one another, right? You can tell that Mandy Patinkin has a deep love in general. He's a very soulful guy, and he's doing something because he feels he has to do it. Like it's an honor bound sort of thing, but it really works from there. And obviously the three of them together were great. I would love to see them do more adventures. I know we would have never gotten a sequel, but whatever. But the other cool thing here is that you have the iconic fight scene between Wesley and Inigo. And this was very meticulously planned and rehearsed. This was actually something that Cary, Elwes, and Mandy Patinkin wanted to do. They wanted to make this thing as epic and awesome as possible. They wanted it to rival other sword fight scenes in movies and be just as iconic. So they trained with fencing instructors Bob Anderson and Peter Diamond, both of whom had worked on the original Star Wars trilogy. Okay, so if you want to look at that fight scene now, just imagine them holding lightsabers, and you'll realize that it's, oh my God, this is Star Wars. Anyway, the actors trained for several weeks before filming began, learning to both fence left and right-handed to ensure their movements were fluid and believable. Anderson and Diamond encouraged Elwes and Patinkin to learn each other's choreography to help them anticipate their opponent's moves and avoid accidents during filming. And it does feel like a very complex fight scene. It's so much fun to watch. Very acrobatic, a lot of jumping and sparring and dodging and rolling and the flipping, right, that they did and everything else. But Elwes and Patinkin spent a lot of their off-time camera time practicing the fight, determined to create a duel, like I said, that would stand out amongst other cinematic sword fights. And quite frankly, out of all the scenes in that movie that are memeable, that one, quite frankly, is the most iconic and memorable. It's very interesting how they made this movie on that particular front, the care and love that went into making it, almost to make it feel like it's a fairy tale that we all know and love, that we all grew up with. And even though people of my generation, the Gen Xers, the Zennials, the Millennials, grew up with The Princess Bride and know it as it is, but when you watch them, when you watch the movie and it goes yeah, you kind of feel like this is a lived in world. And that makes it even more enjoyable because you're able to then suspend disbelief further. And you really want to know more about, the fire forest, right? With the rodents of unusual size and things like that. It's just, it's great. So anyway, this movie, it came out in 1987. It initially premiered at the 1987 Toronto International Film Festival before it came out later in the fall of 1987. The movie had modest box office success, grossing about $30.8 million against that $16 million budget. But now I guarantee you it's made a lot more money. But it was something that was ultimately, again, seen as a success because it did find itself later on. Critical success, on the other hand, was overwhelmingly positive, a 96% on Rotten Tomatoes and a 77% on Metacritic. Even like Gene Siskel, Roger Ebert, and Janet Maslin highlighted the film's charm, with Roger Ebert later listing it as one of the year's best films. And if you're going to sit there and say that it's one of the year's best films, then you can, you're going to love it. This is coming from Ebert, man. Ebert is regarded, heavily, highly regarded. So let's chit chat about the movie itself, because I've gone through how it was made and the awesome stuff with that. This movie reflects, I think, a lot of 80s kids' lives to, how it starts, right? Sick kid home in bed playing a Nintendo game. How many of us did it? How many of us still do it? That's why it's relatable. It's relatable all these years later because we can still be sick sitting in bed playing a video game or watching a movie, and then someone comes in and tries to cheer us up, right? We can relate to that. What I love about this, though, is it's just little Fred Savage, and then in walks Columbo. Right? I mean, I love Peter Falk. And he's like, look, I'm going to tell you a story and you're going to listen. And of course the kid, like a lot of us, like, I'm playing my game. Come on, man. But he goes, okay, fine. I'll listen to my grandpa. Let's do this thing. And I like how he sells it. It's got like true romance, adventure, action, fencing, death, miracles, and he's like, yeah, but is there kissing? Is there kissing? Because that's kind of icky, And the funny thing, too, is that when you had the first kiss between Buttercup and Wesley, even my 6-year-old was like, no kissing, right before it cuts back over to Fred Savage, like doing the same thing. And that's how I knew my daughter was into it, right? So as we were watching the movie and you have the whole, Dread Pirate Roberts captures Buttercup, and they're going to, the whole as you wish thing as he's falling down the hill. My daughter was like, who is that guy? Who is that pirate? And I'm like, well, you're going to find out. And she's like, no, but he killed Wesley. Like, who is he? I'm like, you're going to find out. And then, when she pushes him and he goes, as you wish, there is just like, she's like, it's him. It's the farm boy. So then she's like totally in on it, right? That reveal, I'm so excited to show her Empire Strikes Back, and y'all know why. So I'm so excited for that, when we get to that point, because I think she's going to be, I just want to see her reaction of holy crap. But anyway, like, I just love that reveal, how like my daughter was completely in on the story. She was just totally following it, right? Even if she didn't understand anything with Vincini and the whole iocane powder and everything else. And what I just love that scene, by the way, too, where Wallace Shawn is trying to stall for time and Wesley just calls it out. It's like, no, I'm just getting started. It's like, you have a dizzying intellect. You should see me when I get going. And I laugh at that more now as an adult because I kind of feel the same way. Like if I get on a subject and I'm like overly ruminating it in my brain, it's going to be like, I'm going to look for every possible aspect of it. But of course, never get into never enter into a land war in Asia, and never get into a fight with a Sicilian when there's death on the line or something. I mean, it's great lines that I'm butchering. But what was funny about that too, was later on when Prince Humperdinck shows up with Count Ruger and the rest of the guys, and they're looking over Vincini's dead body. He doesn't mention that he hired Vincini, but he tells Ruger later on that he hired Vincini to start the war with Gilder. And that to me is like really interesting, because he didn't want maybe the other guards, who I'm sure are loyal as hell about it, but he is trying to start a war. He is trying to start a war. And but it's just like, it's great because when they get down to like the fire swamp, that's what it's, a fire swamp. And like, the lightning sand and the rodents of unusual size and the fire explosions, like it was such an interesting, unique environment. It felt very fairy tale. It felt kind of Lord of the Rings. It felt, so interesting. And I love that Wesley's demeanor in that scene is more or less like, yeah, it's not so bad. I mean, I don't want to build a summer home here, but I mean, I think we'll be okay. And he's trying to like reassure Buttercup, and she's just looking at him like, what is wrong with you? But I love it how he tells the story of the Dread Pirate Roberts, right? I was not the first, Dread Pirate Roberts, nor was the man who taught me or the man before him. And when I'm ready to tie it up, I will then bring on a new Dread Pirate Roberts, and go that direction with it, right? And I thought that was such again, they could do it a whole movie about the Dread Pirate Roberts and have that just be the twist at the end. They could do the Wesley story that would like show what happened in the 5 years. Not that they would ever do it now. Not that they ever should do it now. You should never go back and retouch this property, honestly. Unless you're Jason Reitman doing it for Quibi back in 2020, which was great, by the way. I guess I'll just say that now. For those of you who don't know, Jason Reitman did a remake, a home movies version of The Princess Bride. He got Norman Lear to allow him to do it. He got Rob Reiner to allow him to do it. He even got the permission from the person who did the original score for the film. And then he got all of his friends to do it. And he even talked to Jeffrey Katzenberger into donating like $500,000 into the, it's like the World Health Kitchen or something along those lines. It was for a great cause to raise money during COVID for people who were, locked up, or, what's the word I want to use here? Quarantined, who needed it. And that was a very noble cause. And it was a really fun thing. If you haven't seen The Princess Bride on Quibi, you can look it up here on YouTube. It's great. Check it out. But the end of that, you had Carl Reiner. And Carl Reiner was the last scene of that movie where he was playing the grandfather. And the last line that he says is, "As you wish." And which is such a great line for the end of that movie too, just because like it's a grandfather telling his grandson, "I love you." My grandfather died a little less than 4 years ago. I miss him all the time. And, that kind of hit me a little bit watching that, because like my grandfather was awesome, and so, but Carl Reiner said that. And then 3 days later, he passed away. Unfortunately, that was the last thing he recorded. That was the last thing that he did. And that's why that entire production is dedicated to his legacy and dedicated to him. And that's really sweet. And it's really loving. And that's the thing you have to understand. I think personally, one of the reasons why the legacy of The Princess Bride has endured in the way that it has everything to do with the fact, predominantly, that it's made with love, made with care. And even Jason Reitman's home movies edition was made with love and care. And that really, really, really helped because that came through the screen. And the audience just falls in love with the characters in this world and everything. I mean, I will say though, I have a part of my complaint, if you will, and I mentioned this before, was with the only good things or the only good parts edition of the story, is that there are some scenes that are just there like to kind of move the story along, because it's a shorter runtime. I think it's like around a smooth 90 minutes. And they need to get from, scene to scene to scene to scene to scene to get to the end of the film. And that's okay. Because when you get to the middle section, like Wesley's being tortured by Humperdinck and Count Ruger, and he's supposedly dead, and then he screams as he's dying, and everyone throughout the Thieves' Forest and the castle and the village, they all hear him screaming. And, you've got Inigo Montoya going like, that is the man in black, and like he hears it, he knows it. And the thing is though, again, he's an empathetic guy, right? And I think his empathy would allow him to pick up on that. That sounds like such a weird thing, but that's my justification for it in my brain. And then, of course, they find the albino and he uses his father's spirit through his sword in order to open up the door or find where the secret passage is. And then they go and they rescue Wesley. Then they go find Miracle Max. And you got to love, like, we're watching it again. My girlfriend hasn't seen it in forever. And we get to the Miracle Max scene and Billy Crystal is talking. And she's like, is that Billy Crystal? And I'm like, yeah. And I'm like, just wait till you see who his wife is. And of course, out comes the wonderful, the amazing Carol Kane, who doesn't, I mean, that Miracle Max and his wife are just hysterical. Plus also the line of have fun storming the castle, like, or what is it? Like, we need to save this man for, he's got to help us fight Humperdinck. And he's all like, that's not good enough. And then they press on his stomach after blowing the air. And he goes like, true love. And then he goes like, what more noble cause is that? True love. And he's like, no, I heard to glaive. It's this like the little see, Miracle Max. It's just, man, who doesn't love Billy Crystal? I'm sorry. Who doesn't love Billy Crystal? But again, there's other elements again with that, like, they get him, he's alive, they give him like, it looks like they're a chocolate pill, but it also could be like a suppository. And so they give it to him and he's got to kind of, regain his energy and everything else. Right. And so they're trying to create a distraction to kind of get past the guards. Now, remember, like I said, is like at the beginning of this, one of the producers at Fox had suggested that this be like a Wizard of Oz story. I feel like a Wizard of Oz kind of story. Look at the gate scene when they're at the gate scene and there's 60 guards there. Doesn't it kind of feel like they're all going to start chanting, oh, yo, yo, right? It feels like that. And I think that's kind of the whole point, is they wanted to make it seem like it's a Wizard of Oz type movie, And so, like, but here's where I have a bit of a complaint with the scene, is because Wesley's like, if only we had a Holocaust cloak, and he's like, oh, I've got one right here, again, like kind of Deus Ex Machina. All right, fine. I need to move the story along. And they kind of look at him like, how did you get that? Oh, it fit me pretty well. Max said I could keep it. Okay, fine. That's your explanation. What they don't explain is, what's a Holocaust cloak? That's kind of a weird name to call something. Okay, because like, the Holocaust is a very specific term, and it's a very specific thing, and so that to me was always a little bit weird. I need to go and look up what that means. If you know, let me know, please. But what I love about that is then they make André the Giant, the Dread Pirate Roberts, and they play up the mythos, and he just like, scares everyone away, and they get in. And of course, Wesley and Fezzik are trying, holding there while Inigo chases after Count Ruger. And what I love, though, is as he's chasing after Count Ruger and Ruger locks the door and Inigo is trying to break it down, Mandy Patinkin gives this performance that he screams out for Fezzik, Fezzik, I need you. And he screams it out in such a way that is like, you can feel that anger. You can feel the frustration. You can feel it all coming in from like, everything, right? And so then he just like, Fezzik's like, hold on, and he runs over, knocks down the door, and then, Fezzik just goes, thank you. Or no, and Montoya says that. And he runs down and he fights, he gets like, because the thing with the six-fingered man is like, that's a great scene because he throws the knife, wounds Inigo. You think Inigo's going to die. Even my daughter's like, oh no, he's going to die. Like, she was totally into it. And then he uses that strength and that anger to fight back. And he almost loses. But I love it, though, when he's fighting the not the one-arm man. That's another movie a few years later. When he's fighting the six-finger man. And, he's all like, offer me money, offer me power, offer me anything I want. You can have it, you can name it, I'll give it to you all. And then he says, I want my father back, you son of a bitch. And this runs him through. Is such a great ending. And then Christopher Guest just like falls back and dies. Just dead. And then Inigo's like, okay. He just kind of like, okay. It's like, all right then. And then takes off. And then we get the whole scene with Wesley and Humperdinck and the whole, like, I will cut off, your nose and your eyes and your tongue, and people can hear how grotesque you are. It's a great delivery. And Cary Elwes gives this very, very, very great delivery of that part. Very intense, very deliberate. And to where, like, Chris Sarandon is like, I don't know if I should believe you or not. Like, I don't know what to believe. And then so he gets tied up, and then Wesley reveals that he's still weak. And he's like, I knew it. And it's like, all right, now let's leave him tied up. Let's get the heck out of here. And then what I love at the very end of that, though, is where you have that last moment with Inigo and Wesley. And Inigo's like, I've been in the revenge game for so long, I don't really know what to do now. And that's where Wesley's like, have you ever considered piracy? And it's like, now you're like, sequel. And of course, then they all ride off into the sunset and they have their one last good kiss. And then, the grandfather says he'll come back and read the story the next day. And I just love that. I just love the way that it ends. It's a very quick fairy tale. It's got a bunch of great moments in it. It's a lot of the high level moments in it. There's not like any kind of anecdotes about politics, local politics or whatever. It is only the good parts. But what we have to then remember from this is that the entire thing is only all good parts. There's no bad scene in the movie. There's no bad moment in the film. There's nothing. There's like some slow pacing or some questionable things, but that's not bad because it doesn't drag it down when you ask the questions, because it gives you something else to go follow in with really quick. And that is ultimately why this movie, in my opinion, is one of the very few 10 out of 10s that are out there. You can watch this any time of day, any time of year, by yourself or with people, and you're going to enjoy it and love it all the way through. It is a classic through and through. And it's a movie that I intend to watch with my children and my grandchildren and my nephews and everyone, because this is a movie everyone should experience, because it is a work of love. And I think we're going to see a lot of people come to that. And that's how I always view these kind of things, right? If it feels like it's made with love, I'm going to love it. That's how I am as a sappy individual. But we know that the movie, unfortunately, when it came out, was not, like I said, a box office hit at all, but it did become a cult classic. But I don't know if I would call it a cult classic, though. This is what the notes I'm reading here say. It became a cult classic, but I think it's elevated past cult classic. You know what I mean? It's like cult classic is something that's like low rent, low budget, very cheaply made, right? Like The Evil Dead, you could see being a cult classic. But that did spawn a entire franchise, and so, but that one is still, again, Evil Dead is very good. It's 9 out of 10 easy, despite its shortcomings, but they made up for it in other ways, so like, I don't know if I'd call this movie a cult classic, but it did really endear with audiences as time went on. Like I said, it's quotable, it's memeable. There's a lot of great scenes and people watch it and they love it. Like, I'll give you guys an example. One other time I was watching the movie and my stepdad came in right before the duel scene. Okay. And I'm watching it on TV and he comes in, he sits down and he's like, oh, what are you watching? I'm like, I'm watching Princess Bride. And he's like, oh, you're watching a kid's movie. And I'm like, it's not a fucking kid's movie, dude. Like, what are you talking about? And he sits down and he watches the duel scene. And then he ends up watching the rest of the damn movie with me. And I'm like, oh, you're watching a kid's movie too, huh? Like, son of a bitch. And because it's for everyone. It is legitimately for everyone. So here's the weird thing, is that there has been talks of a remake. This came 5 years ago, that there were surfaces of rumors. There were rumors that surfaced about this remake, and it was met with widespread backlash. Okay. Because you see this nowadays, right? Especially now, like, studios are so like buck broken when it comes to these kind of things. They have to reboot, remake everything. The thing is, though, is the whole idea of this was marked as inconceivable, used in the right terminology. And even Cary Elwes echoed the statement by stating that the original film should remain untouched. And that Jamie Lee Curtis even came out. By the way, her husband is Christopher Guest, aka Count Ruger. So she has her connection to the Princess Bride. She's married to one of the guys in it. And she voiced her opposition, and she said that the film was unique and irreplaceable. And that is one of the things is like, not every movie needs to be remade. Instead, they should just re-release it. Give it a good marketing push and re-release it. I would go see it. I know a ton of people who would go see it. Kids who have never seen it would then get experience to it, and they can go back and watch it on Disney Plus, or they can go and buy the VHS, the DVD, the Blu-ray, or the 4K. You know, like you can buy it in any different way. It's such a classic. I would love to see it on the big screen because I've never done that. That's something I'd like to see. What else I'd like to see is for you guys to suggest movies for me to watch. So if you guys have any movies you want me to check out, you guys can always find me on social media at the HWAD podcast, WAD podcast on Twitter. I am in the process of like opening up like a Facebook page. And then I've got the Patreon for people who want to sponsor episodes. That's patreon.com/Matt Jarbo. If you're listening to this on YouTube, please leave me a comment with your thoughts. You're listening to this on Spotify or iTunes or Apple Podcasts, whatever it's called now. Please leave a review. And yeah, thank you guys for going with me on this journey through The Princess Bride, one of my all-time favorite movies. I'll talk to you guys later. Have yourself a great day. Thank you again, and peace out.